Good. All right. I call the North Plains City Council work session order at 6:02. Lori. No. Hold it on. We do roll call, sorry.
Sure. I do whatever you asked me to do.
I know, I couldn't remember which if I was supposed to do it now or later. So go.
Mayor Dumbrowne,
Present.
Councilor DeForge,
Present.
Councilor Hagedorn,
Present.
Councilor Ugarte,
Present.
Councilor Weber,
Present.
Councilor Warrington.
Present.
So, Bill, do you have any, or should I just turn it over?
I give just a quick introduction. So Asen Onar from BDH, our city attorney, is going to lead us through a discussion of purchasing rules, where they are now and for how long, and why it's a good idea to think about updating them, and then discussing different ways of thinking about that, as well as a bit of a word, as you probably saw in the packet about the city council's role as a contract review board. So you have the attorney for an hour. Avail yourselves. So Asen, go ahead, please. Thank you.
And would you like me to do the presentation and share my screen?
That would be great if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Hello everyone. Let me get that going.
She might know what she does. Okay, she is.
Okay. Is everyone able to see my screen?
We can see you.
Yes.
Perfect. Hello again, everyone. It's great to meet you virtually. My name is Asen Onart, and I'm one of the public contracting attorneys at Beery, Elsner, and Hammond. And the goal of tonight's session is to go over some public contracting topics. To the next slide. All right, just a minute. I'm just also trying to figure out how to move my slideshow while I was talking. There we go. Tonight's agenda, our goals are to go over some public contracting overview topics to hopefully educate everyone on state law, what the city's current rules are, and perhaps some areas of update that would be beneficial. And then if we have time at the end, we will go over various types of procurements. So the ultimate goal following this session is that we would be bringing to you an updated version of the city's public contracting rules in the near future for review and approval. And it would be helpful, to get your feedback on preferences and what approach that you would like to see when we work on those updates. And at the outset, I wanted to note, what the contracting rules authorize the city to do versus what other policies come into play. So the contracting rules establish the procurement processes that the city must use when the city contracts with another party. So depending on what you're purchasing, goods, services, personal services, the rules will dictate what procurement process you have to use in doing that. Versus there is a separate policy that would govern how the city ultimately binds itself to a contract and to obligate itself to performance obligations. And that is pursuant to a separate signature authority policy. So at the outset, I wanted to make that distinction. So state law establishes local governing bodies as the local contract review board. And the Attorney General maintains a set of model rules that apply to public contracting procedures for all local governments. So if you have not adopted your own rules or you're silent in a particular area, the AG model rules would apply. But you are permitted to adopt your own rules. In fact, in certain areas such as personal services, you must adopt your own rules. And then each time the AG updates rules, which happens, I would say, every 2 to 3 years, then you should be reviewing your rules to, make updates that align with what the AG has done. So typically, the contract review board under state law can delegate some of its authority, and a lot of that authority is delegated to the city manager, who is, the purchasing agent for the city and would conduct, the day-to-day activities to carry out, those day-to-day purchasing activities. And there are certain things under state law, for example, that a contract review board or council would not be able to delegate. There's something called a special procurement. For example, it's an exemption from the competitive bidding requirements that cannot be delegated. Council must approve those. Just in contrast, as another example, a sole source procurement, that is something that can be delegated to the city manager. So under North Plains code, as with other cities, council is designated as a local contract review board, and then your rules are set forth in resolution 1250, which was passed in 2005 and has not been updated, since that time. So again, to talk a little bit about, authority and council authority versus authority of the city manager and city staff, under your current signature policy, the city manager's signature authority is $50,000. So just by way of example, I've listed on this slide under that authority what the city manager can do. So, they can, without specific council authorization, right, enter into contracts that are $50,000 or less, as long as it's, within the city's, current fiscal year budget. The city manager can issue advertisements for bids or proposals. The city manager can purchase goods and services, again, as long as it's under $50,000. They can make a determination that something can be awarded, as a sole source contract. And again, these are just some examples. Let's see. So again, North Plains contracting rules were last updated in 2005. And as you can imagine, since 2005, a fair amount has changed. Certainly, a lot of the procurement thresholds under state law have been updated. And again, where a city's rules are silent, the AG model rules come in. So this is intended to be an overview, just to give you some insight into where North Plains's various procurement thresholds are currently under your 2005 rules versus the amounts that are currently allowed under state law. And so again, it's different depending on what you are purchasing. So if I could start with the goods and services column, for example, the overall framework is usually a small procurement, which you can directly award to anyone without going through a competitive process. An intermediate procurement requires, 3 competitive quotes. And then for a large procurement, that's where you have to do an RFP or an ITB, depending on what you're purchasing. So for goods and services, the current North Plains threshold is $5,000. So up to $5,000, you can directly award a contract if you're buying goods or services. Anything more than $5,000, you would have to follow the 3 quote process or issue an RFP or ITB. Whereas under state law, you can actually go up to $25,000 now for those small procurements. For intermediate procurements, you can actually go up to $250,000, and anything more than that requires a formal process. Personal services, I'm moving to the left here. So that is an area where cities have a great deal of discretion. You can put in place basically whatever rules you want to follow for personal services. And so many cities follow the state law thresholds that are, the same for small, intermediate, and formal, but you have the ability to sort of set those dollar amounts however you want to. And also, many jurisdictions, because they have a lot of flexibility for personal services, will identify categories where they can make direct awards, such as IT consultants and auditors and legal experts and things like that. For architects and engineers and public improvements, the thresholds are a little bit different. And this is actually an area where North Plains, your rules are silent. And so you would just be following basically the AG rules in those areas. And so because your rules are silent, what I have here on the slide would apply in terms of the dollar amounts and the procurement methods. So again, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make a distinction between procurement types versus signature authority. Signature authority, again, is the dollar value above which, staff must come to council to seek approval for a contract or a procurement related action. It's completely dependent on your local policy. It's separate from procurement thresholds. It's completely up to you how you want to structure your signature policy and what dollar amounts you would like to include. So here, I have included what the current dollar amounts are. Again, anything above $50,000 must come to council. The city manager currently has authority to sign contracts and make purchases up to $50,000, provided they're budgeted, and then department heads have $5,000 authority, and then staff would be up to $500. Now, some cities include their signature authority as part of their contracting rules, and then others have a separate policy. Again, it's completely up to you how you would like to structure that. So continuing on our topic of signature authority, again, typically the city manager is delegated authority under the rules, to make contractor selections and awards. And sometimes the rules themselves will address the signature authority of the city manager, but again, it's also completely fine to have a separate signature authority policy. I wanted to highlight that some cities have adopted sort of a hybrid approach in that, for example, the city manager may be authorized to conduct certain procurements without council approval, but other types of procurements will require council approval regardless of the value of the procurement or the underlying contract. And so there are a lot of options to explore in that area. So again, as I mentioned, the North Plains rules were last updated in 2005. That is a while ago. Some of the potential benefits of considering updating the rules would be to, of course, align them with the current procurement thresholds under state law, which would provide the city, sort of a lot more flexibility in terms of, sort of procurement types. You could go a lot higher in terms of doing intermediate procurements where you only have to get 3 quotes. If you were to update your personal services rules, you could identify categories where it's permissible, to make direct awards regardless of contract price. And I've included some examples there. again, many cities will say, for example, auditors, IT support services, advertising agencies, software as a service providers. Those are areas where you can, without competition, directly award those contracts. And then currently the city is following the AG rules for architects, engineers, and construction-related personal services, which is a very specialized area. And the AG rules are overly complex in this area, and it is possible to streamline that. And we have helped other cities adopt sort of more streamlined rules in that area. So that would be another potential benefit. So again, this is sort of highlighting a little bit more what staff responsibility and department responsibilities are, versus what has to come to council. Violations of the rules do have consequences. Employees may be subject to, disciplinary consequences for policy violations. So it is important to have, rules in place that everyone is following. So this sort of gets to the part of my presentation where we do a little bit of a deeper dive into various procurement types. So I'm happy to take any questions about what we've covered so far before we move into this next section, or we can just keep plowing ahead as well. Okay.
Weber, just a practical question. Resolution 1250, you said that's our guideline for how we do contracts. Is that resolution where all these numbers you're giving us, the 50,000 on down, are those
Exactly
included in that resolution, or where did they come from?
Yes, they come from the resolution. And then the dollar amounts that I had that are not highlighted in yellow would be the dollar amounts that are currently set under state law or the AG model rules, which apply by default if you haven't addressed them in your rules.
So the 50,000, like that number we use, that's a default number, or where does that come from?
Oh, the 50,000 for the city manager's signature authority?
Yeah.
Okay, so that does not come from state law. That is completely within your discretion. And there is a separate financial policy. It's the financial policy that is part of your adopted biennium budget for 2025, 2027. And that is where your signature authority is. And so that is where the 50,000 is coming from.
So there's no actual resolution that gives us that. It's in that finance document.
Yes, exactly.
Pass the budget by resolution. So yes, there is.
So the resolution covers it through that. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Warrington, just want to check in with you since you're online. Do you have any questions or comments so far?
Thank you for checking in. Yeah, I had the question too about all of that. And in the 25 to 27 budget, I guess covers not just the 50,000, but all of those, it sounds like. So it sounds like we have outlined all of the items because they're all highlighted in yellow, which is a good thing, but we probably need to review all of this and update it accordingly as you're suggesting.
Yes. So, you can always do dollar amounts that are less than what is allowed under state law. State law is sort of the ceiling. But this would be sort of what, most other cities would be doing at this point, is just following the state law amounts.
So Councilor Warrington here, these 25,000 on the personal services, would that be for like a bigger city like Portland? And because we don't have that kind of budget, right? So we would do one according to our budget. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and again, personal services is an area where you have the utmost flexibility and discretion. So a lot of cities, I would say, medium-sized to smaller cities are also doing $25,000 because they're, for the most part, following state law and they want more flexibility, again, in terms of the procurement type. So I would say not only big cities, but medium-sized to small ones are also doing these dollar amounts.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Ford.
Councilor DeForge here. Thank you for this presentation. I think my question is similar to Councilor Warrington's. I'm really interested in following the AG guidance just to simplify things for the city, and as long as it's appropriate for a city our size, then I think that would be my recommendation.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. If you want to continue on, we'll come back to, at about 10 till we'll come back to, staff guidance.
Okay. So I wanted to give an overview of the different types of procurements. So goods and services, this is supplies, equipment, materials, property. I've listed some examples there. Services are things such as IT support services, landscaping services, janitorial work, but it's not personal services. So it's not professional services. It's not construction related services and design services, which is sort of its own very special category and has its own rules. Personal services, again, is really any service that you designate as council under your rules as constituting personal services. You have a lot of discretion in terms of the definition there. And again, you have a lot of discretion to create your own procedures in this area. Some examples, again, are like attorneys, audit services, IT services, artists, performers, property managers. So similarly, construction-related services are for like architects and engineers. And that must follow an RFP process where you select the most qualified consultant. It has to be a qualifications-based selection where you consider price at sort of a later stage. And then finally, it's public improvements, which is construction, and that has to be, pursuant to an ITB and must be awarded, to the lowest bidder. A few sort of exceptions are sole source procurements, emergency procurements, and special procurements that I wanted to highlight. So sole source is where there's only one provider or contractor available to provide a particular service. This should be a very rare instance because typically there is more than one provider or contractor. Where, a city wants to make a direct award to a contractor for, sort of a unique set of circumstances, a special procurement is usually what is appropriate, and that requires specific findings that are required under state law to be approved by council. For goods and services, again, if it's more than $250,000, it should be a competitive process where it's either low bid or an RFP. An intermediate procurement requires at least three solicited quotes where the city makes a written record of the efforts that were made. And if 3 quotes are not available, again, you keep a record of efforts that you made. And then small procurements is where you can award basically in any manner that you want to a contractor that you select. And I think we have talked quite a bit about personal services. For architects and engineers, there are different dollar amounts under state law. So the small dollar amount is $100,000. The 3 quote amount is $250,000, and then the formal is $250,000. It is a very specific and complicated process under the AG rules, where for the formal you do an RFQ and then you have to follow it with an RFP. So that is sort of a very specific process that has to be followed. And then for public improvement, it is always a low bid requirement unless an exemption is approved through council. And then these are the dollar amounts for the various procurement types. So that concludes my presentation, but I am available for questions.
Okay, any questions? I have one, but everybody else speak first. Question, comment? Go.
No, not me down.
All right. Okay, well, I'm gonna ask you a question. You said that the AG rules are very complex on architecture and engineering. Can you give us just a super high level and then kind of how would you recommend the council make it easier for staff, I guess is what I'm saying. That makes sense.
It does make sense, and I have to admit, this is not my area of expertise on the construction and design professional side, but I believe I'm just looking at an example. So the AG rules are complicated in the sense that they have this two-step process where you have to do an RFQ followed by an RFP, and I believe we have rules where you can skip that step and just go directly to an RFP. And I believe that is the more streamlined process that we provide, but I'm happy to follow up in writing with you because again, this particular area is not my area of expertise.
Did someone else to the table have comments? Because I think you may have knowledge or no. I'm just trying to make sure we get any. More bill.
They're complex.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, what is the thought? What is your input? Because if it's complex, something that we're dealing with on regular, I don't know, I'm just trying to get more data. That's what I want to understand more.
I guess so my input on it, Dustin can probably really get into it, but there is a higher level of risk to the city from failure of architect or engineer flaw. And those in an engineer and what they work on versus what an architect works on for a building. A bridge collapsing is a different thing from a building having a fire problem, and so depending on the contract, depending on the designer, physical design, type of design, then you kind of get into a bunch of weeds on what the problems are. Dustin, or just a road doesn't curve properly for the speed limit and people go off the side, so Dustin, go ahead.
That makes sense.
I'll try to keep it pretty simple. Yeah, with those typical professional services, there's a lot more risk involved, which is different than, let's say, me hiring a contractor to clean up the GOA.
Right.
Under the current limits right now, I have to go through a lot more process for a lot smaller contract than I would, say, for professional services. And none of these things are pretty cheap. I have to ask Bill for permission for a lot of things over $5,000 because that's pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So
Makes sense. Okay. I just want to understand why. It sounds like it's risk mostly.
yeah.
Councilor Forge.
Thank you, sir. I would support what Mayor's saying. Anything we can do to make it simple for staff is a good thing. I'm kind of interested in your hybrid approach. I think in terms of signature authority, some of the things that maybe big picture I'm looking for is alignment between staff and council. So maybe some types of contracts you would always want the council to review and approve and understand versus as opposed to a straight signature authority. That makes sense.
It does. And I think what you could do is identify certain categories of procurements, for example, that even though let's say under the dollar amounts, the city manager can go ahead and conduct the procurement. Perhaps you require that before the procurement is issued, that council must approve the procurement, or a final award decision must be approved. So that's the way that I have seen some jurisdictions approach it. that there is sort of a step required to approve the procurement. And then we would just work to identify what those areas might be where you would want that additional step followed.
Thank you. That sounds like a great solution. And I think, just in concept from like a visibility standpoint, if we had like a contract register so that the public could understand what sort of contracts are being signed, I think that'd be helpful to include in the policy.
Counselor Warrington here. So as a follow-up to this, Erin, would you suggest then that we actually review Resolution 1250 to see what's there and then work through it to update it accordingly?
So we have a starting point template for cities who want to update their rules and who want to sort of update them pretty significantly. So I would recommend that I work with staff on sort of refining that template and tailoring it for North Plains. And then, once there is a final draft, then it would be, presented to you for feedback.
Counselor Hagan here. I'm in full support of Counselor DeForge's recommendation in terms of visibility and having a little bit more systematic approvals in here baked into the next template proposal. I would also like to see perhaps maybe a little consistency between 1250 in terms of the estimated contractor dollar like the dollar thresholds with the signature authority that you highlighted here on slide 12 of the meeting packet that I pulled yesterday. The other comment or question I actually have for you is there's a lot of information here that you gave us tonight. Clearly resolution 1250 is grossly outdated, and then we have other sprinkles of information and budget files from last year, et cetera, et cetera. What are the top 3 changes that you saw that you would like to recommend to us to make?
Definitely the top would be to address and update personal services, sort of your more generic personal services, because this is an area where you have a lot of discretion again, and the dollar amounts there are so low in terms of what the cost of services are today that I believe the city would have more flexibility there, and that flexibility is pretty important. And I would say the goods and services is the second area because again, the dollar amounts are misaligned quite significantly with state law. So those would really be the top 2. And in the other area, since you're silent, you're following the AG rules by default. So I think that's an okay place to be.
Councilor Ugarte, Erin, I want to say thank you so much for your presentation. I am in alignment with Erin and partnering with city staff to find a medium ground for what would be appropriate and then bring to council. I think just my only question for Erin would be, I heard there was a mention earlier about a list of contracts. And is that something you would typically see presented in other jurisdictions? And I just ask because I'm thinking about staff, and that's one more thing we're adding on to their plate that could potentially, be found through a public records request. So I'm just curious if other jurisdictions have that same suit of following, laying out all the contracts.
I have not seen that specific policy followed in other jurisdictions in terms of maintaining a contract log. I have not.
Okay, thank you. And then just a follow-up question. This might be for Bill, but is that something that a member of the public could request if they were curious?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question. What was it that they could request?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was actually asking a city manager.
Sure.
If that was something that, someone could request if they were curious.
Via a public records request, there would be nothing secret about it. They would request that information via standard public records request.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So I'll say that I concur with Councilor Ugarte about the working with, having the attorney work with staff for updates. I'm concerned also about the list of contracts. Council previously has stated that public records requesting to follow the current process. And since this would be a public records request, I would prefer to keep it that way because it's just adding more work and we certainly have enough of that going on. So that's just my input. But with that, it seems like the consensus seems there for having the city attorney provide an updated list. Do you have a question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Mayor, I understand the concern about a record for public visibility, but how do we bake into this process update to enhance or improve the visibility to council within contract thresholds and signature authority? That is something I think we might be looking into. Yeah, I see Anna's.
Councilor Warren.
Yeah, thank you. I believe that is Council Hagedorn talking. I agree with that, and I think maybe if we just are able to look at one column at a time, bring the personal services update to us, we can talk through that, and then we talk through the goods and services, and we talk each one so we can see what all of this means. And because 5,000 to 25,000 is a huge jump, right? So we all need to be cognizant of what that means and have some input around that, I believe.
Yeah, the 25,000 is the state guideline. That's why I understand where you're coming from. However, 21 years out of date on our contracting language. That's why this is something we need to address. So go ahead.
I'll give an example of that actually on the services side of things. So for the first time ever, we sought assistance. We had to seek assistance, but we sought bids for the non-Garlic Festival annual event contract. The total budget for that at this point in the adopted budget for the NPDA has a long time been running those events. Non-Garlic Festival, so the 11 different city things, different events that happen with city sponsorship every year. Budget for those to manage those events is roughly $13,000 to $14,000 in the adopted budget for FY27. We asked, we had no idea who operates events that many for that type of budget and is insured. We contacted and worked with Explore Tualatin Valley, the local visitor bureau. And for $13,000 at that level of budget, they couldn't find anyone who would even bother to bid on that level of a budget. So all of that is to say that we are so far below what operators, potential good operators and vendors can do for us that moving things in a manner that kind of gives us a better ability to get good services for you all would be extremely helpful.
So, that's where we're at.
Councilor Weber, I'm in agreement with everybody. This is a high priority to hear staff update the document. Just a practical thing for me would be to just have a clear place, all of these laws and guidelines, where do they sit within the city, on the webpage, whatever. I was trying to Google it and just find the finance document. When I went to the city webpage, I couldn't find the finance document. And the resolution, of course, was so old, you couldn't look that up. So this would, I think, would also be a great chance to just decide where we land all this, so it's easy to find the documents once we do them.
So that's a separate project. That's, I believe we are working on getting website update, but that will be a separate project. that wouldn't be a part of this, but I understand, I hear what you're saying when you get the update done, but that's a completely separate
Okay.
conversation.
Thank you.
So Bill, the question was asked, how does council access contracts? House, because obviously we wouldn't, presumably not do a public records request. How would that work, or how would that work?
Yeah, Mayor, no problem. So basically, you would just ask if a counselor wants to see a contract. I can provide that, but I would at the same time provide it to you all consistent with council rules sort of thing. But that's basically all it is.
So does that answer the question? You that asked the council?
I guess my understanding is then all contracts that fall within the permissions and rules and guidelines discussed, all our thresholds, et cetera, would then be, in our council packets, just as an inform in the future. How do we have visibility to that?
You would ask Bill for it. That's what you said. You send a request in for a contract you want to look at.
Right, yeah, the standard way would just be, to ask me for it, and I would just, a particular contract, and I would email it all for you. So the thing is that what's going, I guess the line here is city council oversight or the city management decision and practice and authority. And I think what this line communicates is that council has oversight over certain things directly, very publicly, but anything under those dollar amounts, you're charging the city manager to handle it. And so the additional sharing of that information crosses that line. And so that's part of what that's about. But we're always happy to share any, if there's something that you want to see, we can share it with all of you. But beyond that, there's also the issue of, some contracts we have with personal services firms. They do have, there's sensitive information about how they do something, their methodology or their model or their what have you. And so, in certain circumstances with that, we're a little more careful about how that gets distributed. Doesn't happen a ton, but it does. So that's just one example of how it can get complicated sometimes. But we can provide that to you and all of you at the same time. If something comes up that you're interested in better understanding. So.
Thanks.
Okay, so what I think I hear consensus on is we would like the attorney to work with staff and bring us back in a date. Is that? Yes, Councilor Hero?
Yes.
Councilor Warren, does that work for you?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
And are we generally good with starting at all the state guidelines and then if there's specific recommendations, go from there? Is that what I heard here? Okay. Yeah, Councilor Warren. All right. So, so Bill and sorry. Eisen, they said that right, apologies. So if you can work together on that, and kind of work out what within the state guidelines, but also kind of some recommendations of where things should be different or should be less complex or more complex. I'm not sure where to put that, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
And then recommended signature authorities at each level would be helpful. That would be great. Good. Okay, sure.
Just Councilor Warrington here. I'm sorry, one quick question. The signature authority of whatever it is that per item, per day, per month? So can you spend $500 if that's your signature authority and then later on in the day do another 500? What does that mean, the signature authority? Is it just per transaction?
Yes, it's typically per transaction. It could be per contract. It could be, a purchase order if you're, utilizing a purchase order. So it is per transaction or contract. Yes.
What I will do is clarify, in my time here, there's never been a contract for anything less than $5,000-ish. The only time you run into kind of things like that is, you go out for a piece of equipment for the water system, it didn't have component X and Z, then you have to go out and spend another $500, that sort of thing. Because it's expensive specialized equipment, but it's still kind of very low in the total cost amount. But as far as the contract goes, we don't, we try to write contracts, put contracts together and find vendors that can do things kind of more holistically about cost, doesn't go into it.
Council, one of the things, to also keep into consideration with, some of the contracts for facilities maintenance and everything, sometimes there's a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year agreement. And then a 1 year agreement would be a lot cheaper than a 5 year agreement, and a 5 year agreement would push us well past that threshold. And so that's one of the things I've been trying to work really hard is how can I get a 1 year agreement so it's within my budget authority? Which makes it very complicated, and a lot more time consuming. And so this would allow things for me to do like, the landscape contract to, adjust that. I've got a water, source contract that I'm working on that I pretty much have to tell you have a $50,000 budget, otherwise it's gonna have to go through a formal bid. That's kind of like, it really does affect a lot of things in the public works, is I have to keep things very, very cheap. And if I were to have to do a formal bid for everything, that would lengthen the process exponentially. A big example right now would be the roof for Jesse Mays. Under what we're looking at right now, I'm gonna have to go for a formal bid, and it's gonna take a very long refined process. We're gonna have to get everything when I can just do a simple 3 bid process. So it's kind of like something that hits a little bit harder home right now, that this helps us to be a little bit more expeditious. And would otherwise take a lot longer to get it through the current process.
Okay, so I think we have consensus, let's move forward with that, and, unless there's anything else, we will adjourn until the council meeting.
Thank you, Ace.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Adjourned, at 6:49, we will read